In a peaceful valley surrounded by green hills and calm rivers, there lived a young woman named Grace. Her beauty was known far and wide. People said her skin glowed like polished stone, her eyes were calm and thoughtful, and her presence made even the loudest people quiet. But Grace wasn't just known for her looks. What really made people talk was her dowry. Her father, Chief William, had prepared great wealth for whoever married her. Kings, princes, and rich merchants sent gifts, camels, gold, and clothes made from fine silk, but none had won her heart. Even with all the gifts and attention, Grace remained quiet and distant. She liked to walk to the village market and stand at the edge, watching everyday people go about their lives. She saw joy in their eyes and love in the way husbands and wives treated each other. That's the kind of love I want, she thought. But her mother, Lady Martha, always warned her. Love doesn't feed a home, Grace. Money builds a family's name. Still, Grace kept her dream close to her heart. She didn't want a man who came with camels. She wanted someone who came with care. One warm afternoon during the village's yam festival, while the drums played and the smell of roasted corn filled the air, Grace slipped away from the crowd. She wore a simple cloth, blending in like a regular girl. As she walked through the market, her eyes stopped on a tall man near the palm wine stall. He had a warm smile and was laughing with children. She watched as he helped an old woman carry her basket. His clothes were plain, and his hands showed signs of hard work. Yet there was something about him, something gentle and real. Grace moved closer, pretending to look at sugarcane. The man noticed her but didn't bow or stare. He gave a small respectful nod and continued helping people. Grace's heart beat faster. That night, she couldn't stop thinking about him. He didn't even ask who I was, she whispered to herself, lying in bed. But he made me feel seen. She didn't know his name yet, but she knew she wanted to see him again. A new feeling had started growing inside her, a quiet kind of hope. The next day, Grace returned to the market wearing a plain dress, taking only one helper with her. She walked slowly, eyes scanning every corner. Then she saw him, standing by the sugarcane stall, talking with the seller and smiling wide. Taking a deep breath, she walked up to him. "Hello," she said softly. "What's your name?" "David," he replied with a kind smile. "And you?" "Anna," she answered, hiding her real name. They spoke for a few minutes. David told her how he worked in the yam fields and carved wooden toys for the children. When they parted, he handed her a small wooden bird. "For your smile," he said. Grace held it close all the way home. Over the next few days, Grace kept returning to the market. Each time she wore a simple outfit and used a different name. And each time David was there, kind, honest, and full of stories. They laughed together. He spoke to her like she was just a girl, not a princess. Grace loved that. But with every meeting, a small fear grew inside her. David thought she was a regular village girl. He didn't know the truth, and she didn't know how long she could keep the secret. One morning, Grace's older brother, Daniel, noticed her sneaking out again. He followed her quietly, staying hidden behind market stalls. He watched as Grace laughed and talked with David like they were old friends. That evening, when Grace returned to the palace, Daniel stood in her doorway. "Grace," he said sternly, "do you know what you're doing?" She looked away but answered calmly, "Yes." "He's a poor farmer," Daniel hissed. "Father will never allow this. You'll ruin everything." Grace didn't blink. "He's kind. He sees me, not my father's gold. But palaces have ears." Servants began whispering and soon, the news reached Chief William. That night, he called Grace into his chamber. The room was quiet, lit by a single oil lamp. He didn't look at her at first. "Is it true?" he asked, voice low. "Are you meeting a man named David?" "Yes, father," Grace said softly. "He has no title, no wealth, no power. But he has something the others don't," she replied. "He has love." Chief William's face grew dark. "If you continue this, you will be sent away." Grace's eyes filled with tears, but she stood tall. "Then send me," she whispered. "But I will not marry someone I don't love." The very next day, Chief William summoned the village elders and announced Grace's engagement to Prince Edward, the son of a nearby king. The wedding would happen in 2 months. Grace felt her world fall apart. She begged her mother, begged Daniel. But no one dared speak against the chief. That night, Grace sent a message through a kind merchant. It reached David at sunset. It read, "Meet me by the old river tree. Midnight." David arrived to find Grace waiting, wrapped in a shawl, her face pale but determined. "They want to marry me off," she said. "To someone else." She nodded. David took her hands gently. "Then let's write our own story," he whispered. Under the moonlight they made a vow. They would not let money or power decide their future. David promised to speak to the village elders. "I will prove I'm worthy," he said. "Not with gold, but with truth." Grace smiled, but her eyes were still full of fear. "What if they say no?" "Then we still won't give up," he said. "Love is worth the fight." He kissed her forehead gently. That moment, they knew their journey would not be easy, but it was one they would walk together. The next day, David stood before the village council. It was rare for someone like him to be allowed to speak, but the story had already begun to spread. He spoke clearly. "I am not rich, but I work hard. I live with honesty. I love Grace not because she is beautiful, but because she listens, she cares, and she is strong." One elder leaned forward. "But what can you offer her?" David replied. "My whole heart, my hands, my promise to protect her even when I have nothing." The council was divided. Some elders smiled and nodded. Others looked away. "Love is sweet," one muttered. "But it doesn't feed a palace." Still, David's words began to travel across the village. Mothers whispered about the good things he'd done. Children spoke of his toys. Farmers remembered how he always helped others with no payment. People started gathering at the palace gates, speaking up. "He may not have money," one woman said, "but he has honor." Chief William heard the voices. Still he would not back down. He ordered that Grace be kept inside the palace, away from all visitors. But Grace did not cry. She stared out of her window, waiting for the moment she could leave again. One evening, her mother came to her room quietly. "I was once like you," Lady Martha said. "I loved someone else before I married your father. Do you regret it?" Grace asked. "Every day," her mother said softly. That same night, a kind maid helped Grace sneak out through a small door behind the palace. Lady Martha watched from her window and gave a silent nod. Grace ran through the dark forest path, heart pounding. She didn't stop until she reached David's small hut on the hill. He opened the door, surprised. "Grace!" She threw herself into his arms. "I couldn't stay. I had to come." He nodded, holding her close. "Then we'll face this together." For several days, they lived quietly in the small hut. Friends from the village brought them food and blankets. David built a new hut beside his own, slowly, piece by piece. Grace helped carry wood, fetched water, and learned how to cook over a fire. She smiled more, laughed more, even as fear hung in the background. "This life is simple," she said one morning, "but it feels real." David smiled. "It's because it is." Back at the palace, Chief William grew angrier each day. He sent messengers to nearby lands, declaring Grace was no longer his daughter. "If she does not return in 7 days," he shouted, "her name will be erased from this family." The villagers were shocked. Some agreed with the chief, but many did not. "He's going too far," one elder whispered. "This isn't leadership, it's pride." Daniel, Grace's brother, watched all of this quietly. Finally, he stood before their father. "Let her go," he said. "Never," the chief replied. "A girl from our family cannot live with a farmer." Daniel clenched his fists. "Then maybe it's not Grace who's wrong. Maybe it's us." Chief William turned away. But the doubt in his heart had begun to grow. In the hut, Grace sat outside with David, watching the fireflies. "Did I do the right thing?" she asked softly. David took her hand. "You followed your heart. That's never wrong." But danger was coming. One morning, a group of drummers walked into the village, followed by a royal messenger. He held a scroll and read loudly. "David is to face 3 tests. If he passes, he may marry Grace. If he fails, she returns to the palace." The village was buzzing with talk. "3 tests?" someone whispered. "What kind of tests?" David stood up in front of the crowd. "I accept," he said boldly. Grace grabbed his hand. "Are you sure?" David nodded. "If love means anything, then this is worth it." The first test would be one of strength. The second, wisdom. Third, honor. Grace closed her eyes and whispered a prayer. Their love was now being tested in the open. The next morning, the villagers gathered near the village square. The first test was ready. In the center lay the stone of strength, a large sacred rock only few had ever lifted. Even some warriors had failed. David stepped forward. He closed his eyes and whispered a short prayer. Then he bent low, gripped the sides and pulled. It didn't rise high, but it moved. Gasps echoed. One of the elders stepped forward and said, "Strength is not just in arms, but in courage." The first test was passed. The second test was wisdom. David was taken before the council and given a riddle. What becomes bigger the more you take away from it? The elders waited. Some nobles watched from the sides, smirking. David stayed quiet for a while, then raised his head. "A hole," he said. The elders looked at each other, nodding slowly. "Correct," one replied. Grace smiled through tears. David had passed the second test too. The third and final test was honor. A nobleman came to David secretly and placed a heavy bag of gold before him. "Take this," he whispered, "and leave Grace. Let her return to her palace life. Save yourself the trouble." David looked at the gold, then at the man. "You can keep your coins," he said. "What we've built cannot be bought." He returned the gold untouched. Word spread. The villagers clapped and cheered. Even some palace guards joined in the applause. Chief William heard the results with a cold face. But inside he felt a quiet shaking. That evening, he sat alone under the stars, his wife, Lady Martha, walking up behind him. "She still loves you," she said. "She defied me," the chief whispered. "She followed her heart. You taught her to be strong, and now she's using that strength." The chief let out a long sigh. "Maybe I've been looking at this all wrong." At sunrise, a messenger arrived at David's hut. "Chief William wishes to speak with you," he said. David dressed simply and walked to the palace, his heart steady. In the courtyard, the chief waited. "You have no crown, no fortune," he said. "I don't want those," David replied. "I want to love Grace and care for her all my days." Chief William studied him, then slowly placed a hand on David's shoulder. "Then do it, with my blessing." A week later, Grace and David stood under the old village Iroko tree where lovers once carved their names. All around them were smiling faces. Farmers, elders, even some nobles. Drums played. Dancers twirled. Grace wore a simple gown she had sewn herself. David held her hand tightly. As they said their vows, the village erupted in cheers. It was not a wedding of gold and jewels, but of joy, truth, and love. After the wedding, Grace and David returned to their small hut, now expanded with help from the villagers. Children came by daily to hear stories or learn how to carve. Grace started a small herb garden and shared healing knowledge with women in the village. They found peace in the small things: morning tea, laughter over cooking fires, and evening talks under the stars. Yet they knew not all trouble was gone. One quiet afternoon, Grace received a letter from her mother. "Come to the palace alone," it said. Grace went quietly and found Lady Martha waiting with a worried face. "There are whispers," she said. "Prince Edward feels insulted by your marriage. He may try to cause harm, not out of love but pride. Grace nodded. We are not afraid. But we will be ready. When Grace told David, he grew silent. That night, he went to the village elders. If trouble comes, he said, I will be the first to stand and protect Grace and this village. The elders agreed to start preparing. Men trained during the day. Homes were quietly fortified. The village stood together, not just for Grace and David but for the values they now shared. Weeks later, riders from Prince Edward's kingdom came. They brought no weapons, only scrolls. The message was clear. Return Grace or face the consequences. Chief William gathered the village leaders, and this time, David stood beside him. She is no longer just my daughter, the chief said. She is a wife and part of this land. And we will not hand her over. The elders nodded. We stand with them. To everyone's surprise, a message came from a nearby kingdom. The leader, once a rival of Prince Edward's father, offered help. If Oaktown falls, so does peace. We stand with you. With that came supplies, food, and fighters. The village was no longer alone. What had begun as a love story was now a symbol of unity and truth. Spies tried to sneak into the village at night. One was caught near the water well with oil and flint. David faced him directly. Who sent you? He asked. The young man shook with fear. They planned to burn your hut, he confessed, so Grace would return to the palace. David let him go with a message. Tell your prince, our home is built on people, not straw. And people don't burn easily. That night, villagers lined the paths with lamps. Men and women stayed awake, keeping watch. Grace and David sat outside their hut, hand in hand, showing no fear. But no one came. Whether it was fear or honor that held back the attack, they didn't know. But as the sun rose, the village remained safe. The people smiled in quiet victory. To celebrate their strength and unity, the elders called for a special event, an early yam moon festival. Drums beat through the hills. People danced for joy, not just for harvest, but for peace. Grace wore a deep blue dress she had dyed herself. David unveiled a new statue he carved, a couple standing tall, surrounded by open arms. This is who we are now, he said. A few weeks later, Chief William visited their home. Grace served him roasted yams while David sat beside him. You've made her smile more than I ever did, the chief said quietly. David bowed his head. Thank you for letting us live freely. The chief shook his head. I didn't give you anything. You earned it. That evening, Grace walked with her father under the trees. For the first time, they spoke not as princess and chief, but as daughter and father. I used to think love made us weak, the chief said. And now? Grace asked. It's what makes us strong. Months passed, and a soft change came over their home. One morning, Grace took David's hand and placed it gently on her belly. It's time, she said with a smile. David's eyes filled with tears. A child. Yes, she nodded. That night they told the village. The joy echoed louder than the festival drums. David carved a new statue under the Iroko tree. A family of 3 hands joined. Grace sang as she watered her garden, her belly growing round with life. Neighbors came with gifts. Children danced around her. Elders blessed her with gentle hands. The whole village treated her like a queen, though not because of her title, but her heart. Letters began arriving from other chiefs and leaders. Chief William had started writing about what had happened, how love had shaped the village more than wealth ever did. One reply read, "Perhaps we should start listening to our daughters more." Lady Martha laughed when she read it aloud. "You've started a movement, child." Grace gave birth one quiet morning. After hours of labor, a loud, strong cry filled the air. David held their daughter gently, tears rolling down his cheeks. "She's perfect," he whispered. They named her Hope. "She is the reason we fought," Grace said. "And she will be the proof that love builds legacies," David added. David carved a small wooden necklace in the shape of a dove and placed it around baby Hope's neck. You won't wear gold to prove your worth, he whispered. You will wear truth. The villagers were touched by the gesture. One elder said, From now on, every firstborn child in this village should receive something handmade from the heart. It became a new tradition. Life in the village felt brighter. Hope grew quickly, always curious and full of energy. Children followed Grace around, singing songs about her bravery. David kept teaching young boys how to carve and build. Grace often sat in her garden with local women, sharing herbal remedies and stories about motherhood. She is not just a wife, one villager said. She is the heart of Oaktown. Then, one quiet afternoon, a rider approached the village. His horse was tired and his clothes dusty. It was Prince Edward. But he carried no sword, only a letter. I've come to speak, not to fight, he said. Grace and David looked at each other, surprised but calm. Then let us talk, David replied. They met under the Iroko tree. Edward sat down slowly and said, I didn't come to take you back. I came to understand. He looked at David. You have something I never did, peace. I spent my life chasing power, and I'm still not happy. David nodded. Peace doesn't come from thrones. It comes from truth. Over the next few days, Prince Edward stayed in the village. He helped rebuild the school, worked in the fields, and even taught archery to the boys. First, people kept their distance. But slowly, they began to see he was changing. One evening by the fire, he turned to Grace. Losing you taught me that love must be earned, not demanded. She replied gently. And healing begins when you stop pretending to be strong. Years passed. Hope grew taller and wiser. She asked many questions, often making the elders smile and shake their heads. Grace taught her kindness. David taught her honesty. The village taught her courage. One day she asked her grandfather, Chief William, what makes a good leader? He thought for a while, then said, someone who listens with their heart before they speak with their mouth. 10 years after Grace and David's marriage, the village began a new tradition, the Legacy Festival. It celebrated those who had helped shape the new values of Oaktown. People came from faraway lands to watch and join the joy. There was music, dancing, stories, and laughter. Statues were unveiled. The biggest one showed Grace, David, and young Hope. Hands joined, eyes lifted to the sky. David stood before the crowd and gave a short speech. We didn't plan to change anything, he said. We just followed our hearts. The crowd clapped for a long time. Some cried. Others held their children close. In that moment, it didn't matter who was rich or poor, only who had the courage to love without fear. Back in her garden, now full of flowers and resting benches, Grace sat with Hope under the moonlight. I once thought I had to choose between love and legacy, Grace said softly. But you made both, Hope replied. Yes, Grace smiled. And you, my child, are our legacy. Hope leaned her head on her mother's shoulder. Will I find love too? Grace looked into her daughter's curious eyes. If love finds you, protect it. Grow it. Never trade it for gold or praise. Let it grow like a seed. Slowly, gently, truthfully. Hope smiled. I will, Mama. David and Grace grew older. Their hair turned silver, like the mist over the river at dawn. But their steps were still strong, and their love still burned warm. They watched new families bloom, many inspired by their story. I never wore a crown, David once said, but I've lived like a king. Grace laughed. And I've loved like a queen. Prince Edward eventually returned to his kingdom, but he was no longer the same man. He ruled with a quieter voice and a gentler hand. He often wrote letters to David and Grace, calling them his first true teachers. Thank you, he once wrote, for showing me what real strength looks like. Hope became a storyteller. She gathered children under the Iroko tree and told them how her parents met, how they fought for love, and how the village stood behind them. She always ended her story by saying, the best kings and queens don't sit on thrones. They walk among their people. One night, the elders gathered for a quiet dinner. They looked at David and Grace and said, "You gave us more than just a story. You gave us a new way to live." Grace smiled. "We only followed the truth." And in doing so, an elder replied, "You changed the meaning of royalty." The village kept growing but never forgot its roots. The Iroko tree remained the heart of everything. Beneath it were carved names, dates, and prayers from couples who came to honor love. David often sat there with a carving knife, watching young lovers pass by and smiling quietly. Grace spent her final years teaching herbs and healing to young girls. She believed knowledge should never be hidden. "Share what you know," she often said, "and the world will heal faster." Hope sat by her side, writing down every lesson in a little brown notebook. When Grace passed peacefully one morning, the village wept. Bells rang for hours. David held her hand until the last moment. "You were my light," he whispered. "She still is," Hope said, placing her mother's dove necklace around her own neck. David lived a little while longer. On his final day, he walked slowly to the Iroko tree, sat down and looked at the sky. "I kept my promise," he whispered. He closed his eyes and smiled, leaving this world gently like a soft breeze. Hope buried her parents beside the Iroko tree, beneath the statue David once carved. The whole village came. Songs were sung, candles lit, stories shared. That night, Hope stood before the people. "They gave us more than love," she said. "They gave us truth, and truth never dies." Years later, travelers would visit Oaktown not for its riches, but for its story. They would sit beneath the great tree and listen to Hope's children speak. "In this village," they would say, "the strongest thing isn't stone or gold, it's love that never gave up." And as the sun set over the hills, the story of Grace and David lived on, whispered in every breeze, carved in every heart. Many seasons later, when Hope had grown old and the village had changed with time, children still gathered beneath the Iroko tree. They no longer remembered kings with armies or chiefs with gold, but they remembered Grace and David. They remembered how a girl chose love over luxury, and how a man without a crown became a symbol of peace. And as the wind passed through the leaves above, it whispered the same truth to every new ear. The greatest kingdoms are not built with gold or guarded by swords. They are built with hearts that dare to love and never yield.